The town of Eldergrove woke slowly. It was always like this on a summer morning. A thick white fog rolled in from the surrounding hills, blanketing everything in a soft, quiet mystery. The fog was a constant companion in Eldergrove, a gentle ghost that hugged the cobblestone streets and clung to the ancient oak trees. It made the world feel small and secret, as if the town were the only place left on earth. But then, the sun would begin its ascent, casting long golden fingers of light through the mist. These rays of sun were like promises, painting the dewdrops on spiderwebs with a shimmering ethereal glow, and turning the fog from a solid white wall into a dancing translucent veil. In a small cottage at the edge of town lived a girl named Elara. She was 13 years old and her heart was filled with a boundless curiosity that the fog could never contain. She loved the quiet mystery of her town, the way secrets seemed to hide just around every corner, waiting to be discovered. Elara spent her days exploring, wandering through the winding lanes and whispering forests that bordered her home. She believed that magic was real, not the kind you read about in dusty old books, but a living, breathing magic that hummed just beneath the surface of everyday life. She felt it in the rustle of the leaves and the hush of the morning fog. Eldergrove was a place where time seemed to move differently. The world outside might be rushing forward, but here, things remained much as they had for centuries. The houses were old, with crooked roofs and windows that looked like sleepy eyes. The people were kind, with stories in their smiles and a knowing glint in their eyes, as if they all shared a beautiful secret. Elara often wondered what that secret was. She would sit by her window watching the fog swirl and drift and imagine what wonders it might be hiding from view. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that there was more to Eldergrove than met the eye. Her grandmother, a woman with hair the color of spun silver and eyes that sparkled with ancient wisdom, seemed to understand Elara's restless heart. She never told Elara to stop daydreaming or to be more practical. Instead, she would simply smile, a warm, knowing smile that made Elara feel as though she were on the cusp of something extraordinary. Her grandmother's garden was a world of its own, a lush and wild place where flowers bloomed in impossible colors, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and sweet honeysuckle. It was a place of magic, and Elara knew that if she were ever to find a real adventure, it would begin right there. One afternoon, as the sun warmed the damp soil, Elara was exploring her grandmother's garden. She was tracing the intricate patterns of a snail's shell when something caught her eye. Tucked beneath the sprawling leaves of a peony bush was a small, dark bundle. It was a piece of rich black velvet, tied neatly with a silver ribbon. Her heart gave a little flutter of excitement. This was not something that belonged in a garden. Carefully, she reached out and picked it up. The velvet was soft and cool to the touch, and as she untied the ribbon, she felt a strange sense of anticipation, a feeling that she was about to uncover something important. Inside the velvet lay a key. It was old and fashioned from rusted iron, with an ornate clover-shaped head and a long, slender shaft. It was unlike any key Elara had ever seen before. It looked like it belonged to a castle or a secret treasure chest from a forgotten tale. The rust gave it an ancient, almost wise appearance, as if it had waited a very long time to be found. She held it in the palm of her hand, its weight feeling significant and solid. It felt like more than just a key. It felt like a possibility, a question waiting for an answer. She knew without a doubt that this was no ordinary object. She ran inside to show her grandmother, her feet barely touching the ground. She found her sitting in her favorite armchair, knitting a scarf the color of the twilight sky. Elara held out her hand, revealing the key nestled in its velvet bed. Her grandmother looked down, and a slow, cryptic smile spread across her face. It was a warm smile, but it held a depth of knowledge that Elara couldn't quite decipher. She didn't ask where Elara had found it, nor did she seem surprised. She simply reached out, her gentle fingers brushing against Elara's, and gave a small, encouraging nod before returning to her knitting. That night, Elara placed the key on her bedside table. As the house fell silent and the moon cast a silvery light through her window, a strange thing happened. She began to hear a sound, a soft and melodic whisper that seemed to come directly from the key. It was not a voice of words, but of feelings, of curiosity and longing, and a gentle invitation. The whispers were like a soft, magical song, a lullaby from another world that danced in the quiet air of her room. She lay in bed, listening intently, her eyes wide with wonder. The key was calling to her, and she knew she had to follow. Long before the sun had risen, while the fog still lay thick and heavy upon the world, Alara slipped out of bed. The whispers from the key had grown stronger, a persistent gentle hum that pulled at her like an invisible thread. She dressed quickly, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilarating excitement. With the old iron key clutched tightly in her hand, she crept out of the cottage and into the pre-dawn chill. The garden was a ghostly landscape, the familiar shapes of flowers and trees transformed into mysterious silhouettes by the dense, swirling mist. The air was cool and damp against her cheeks as she followed the key's silent song. The whispers led her past the fragrant rose bushes and under the low-hanging branches of the willow tree, to a part of the garden she rarely visited. There, half hidden by a thick curtain of overgrown ivy, stood an old, dilapidated shed. Its wood was gray and weathered and its roof sagged in the middle, but it was the place the whispers had guided her to. A shiver ran down her spine, but it was not from the cold. It was the thrill of discovery, the feeling that she was standing on the very edge of a great secret. She took a deep breath, the scent of wet ivy and old wood filling her lungs, and pushed aside the clinging vines. Inside, the shed was dark and cluttered, filled with forgotten gardening tools, dusty clay pots, and the faint smell of spiders and thyme. Moonlight streamed through a grimy window pane, illuminating dancing dust motes in the air. The whispers from the key grew more insistent now, a clear and steady hum that guided her toward the back wall. She ran her hands along the rough wooden planks, her fingers searching for something, though she wasn't sure what. Then, her hand met something cold and unyielding. It was a small, round handle, almost completely concealed by the shadows and the surrounding clutter. With a surge of effort, she pulled at the handle. A section of the wooden wall groaned in protest and swung inward, revealing not the garden outside, but a solid iron door set directly into the earth behind the shed. It was ancient and black, with no visible lock or handle, save for a single ornate keyhole that looked strangely familiar. It was a perfect match for the key she held in her hand. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the secret. With a trembling hand she pushed the rusted key into the lock. It slid in with a satisfying click, a sound that seemed to echo in the profound silence of the shed. With a deep, resonant groan that seemed to shake the very ground beneath her, the heavy iron door swung open. Alara gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. Before her was not a dark, earthy cellar but a long, glowing hallway that pulsed with a magical, blue-gold light. The air inside hummed with a gentle energy, warm and inviting. Floating gracefully in the air were dozens of paper lanterns, each one glowing with a soft, inner fire that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The walls themselves were not made of stone or wood, but seemed to be alive, covered in moving portraits of strange and wonderful creatures who blinked and smiled as she passed. As she took her first tentative step into the magical corridor, a new figure appeared from the shimmering light ahead. It was a fox, impeccably dressed in a tiny red waistcoat and a pair of spectacles perched on his nose. He did not seem surprised to see her. He simply stood on his hind legs, looked at her with intelligent amber eyes and gave a slow, courteous nod. Then, without a sound, he turned and trotted gracefully toward a magnificent glowing archway at the far end of the hall, disappearing through it as if walking through a waterfall of light. Alara was too stunned to speak, her mind racing to comprehend what she was seeing. Hesitantly, she followed the path the fox had taken. As she passed through the archway, the hallway vanished, and she found herself standing on a floating island of grass under a twilight sky filled with two moons. Below her, a breathtaking and slightly eerie world unfolded. This was Key Realm. Countless other floating islands drifted lazily through the air, connected by bridges made of pure light. Glowing crystalline trees grew on these islands, their branches dripping with soft, luminous fruit. All around her, doors of every shape and size floated aimlessly in the air, some grand and ornate, others simple and wooden, each one a silent promise of another mystery. A sense of profound awe and wonder washed over Alara, chasing away any lingering fear. The air here was alive with magic, a feeling of endless possibility and grand adventure. She looked at the rusted key still clutched in her hand, then back at the impossible, beautiful world that stretched out before her. The whispers had led her here, to a place she had only ever dreamed of, a reality far more magical than any story she had ever read. This was not the end of her journey. She knew, with a heart full of courage and excitement, that it was only the very beginning. Her adventure had just started.